One of the largest complaints that I see and hear in my Facebook group and other Facebook groups in comments is that software and technology is hard. And for me, I've never really felt that way. And so when people said that to me, I just felt like it was an excuse. And then I decided, you know what? I think I need to do something that is outside my comfort zone. So that's scary to me. So that way I can maybe come up with some tips to help other people overcome their fears of technology and software. So I decided to work on my car. Now, this was partly inspired by the fact that it threw an error while I was driving. So kind of out of necessity, right? I was taking my daughter to archery class and I drive a Land Rover LR3. It's a 2008. So it's older and it's a Land Rover, so it's going to have problems. And I'm driving along and all of a sudden it says transmission error and HDC fault. And I'm like, what is that? So I pull over because when it throws the error, it drops my car, the suspension, down into the lowest level. And then I can hit things easier if I'm going high speeds, right? So you don't want to go high speeds. I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So I pull over and I'm like, I don't know. So it was letting me drive, so I kept going. I finally sat down and decided I'm going to have to deal with this, or I'm going to have to pay someone to deal with it, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, I don't have the time to drop my car off somewhere and have it, sit there for days on end, because it takes a while to get parts these days. So I'm like, I'm going to do some research and see if I can figure it out. In the meantime, as long as I'm going like 30, 35 miles an hour, which is pretty much everywhere I need to go, then I should be fine. So let's jump into this. Now you have a little bit of the background, right? So first of all, yes, some things are scary, right? I mean, think about this. I could ruin my car. Like, I was thinking about that when I did some research and it said that it could potentially be the battery. I go to do stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've heard of people like hooking things up wrong to the battery and like killing the car and like frying the electronics. I'm like, oh, what if I do that? I don't want to kill my car. So it's scary, right? Now think about this from software and technology. It's very, very uncommon that you're going to ruin something. There are some other fears that are legitimate, but who cares, right? Like, oh, my Facebook account might get shut down. So what? There are other resources, right? Or, oh, if I have an email account and they don't like what I'm emailing, they can shut me down. So what? Do the things that you need to do to make sure that you have that backed up. You should do it anyway, because even if you do nothing wrong, they can shut it down. So there are a lot of things that I hear when I hear people say that. I go, yeah, it's scary and the what ifs are there, but so what? It's scarier to me, at least. And I know this isn't always true for everyone, but it's scarier to me to think that I'm going to potentially ruin my vehicle, right? That's scarier than saying, oh, something might get shut down and I have to figure out another way to do something. But I guess that's why I decided to do this, is test it out, right? So here are some steps that I followed to fix my car. And this is kind of similar to what you can do for your own solutions for overcoming technology issues or software issues. And the first thing is research. So for me, I used YouTube. I used the comments in YouTube and forums to help me kind of understand potential problems in my car. And it's kind of funny because apparently the problem, HDC stands for hill descent control. And so the HDC fault, transmission fault, and parking brake fault, they were all three kind of together. And they said, okay, they're tied together and there's a lot of different possibilities along there. And one of the possibilities was the battery. They said that's the most common. But I drove around for a couple of weeks, couldn't get the battery to really go low enough to be a definite yes on that. And since batteries are like $200, I'm like, oh, let's try number two. Let's see what the number two problem is. And the number two problem was, it was a brake light switch. They're like, oh yeah, the brake light switch goes out all the time. So if you start having these exact errors, this is frequently a problem. So just swap it out. So I did some research on that, found it, and I was like, I actually found it on AutoZone initially. And there's out of stock, can't buy it. And I'm like, why do you even have it on your site? That's so dumb. Then I was like, okay, I'm going to find it on O'Reilly's. Well, it looked like it might have been in stock. So I drive all the way over there. And then I realized it's not in stock. They don't even carry the brand in stock. I have to order it to have it delivered. And I'm like, oh, if I'm going to have it order it to get delivered, I'm going to buy a cheaper one. So go to Amazon, $13. And I'm like, ooh, that is worth it to me just to see if that might be the problem. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So I did the research and I figured out what the issues were and how to solve it. And then I bought the part, right? So I said, okay, I'm going to buy the part/software, right? So if you're thinking of this from software technology, you've done the research, you figured out what you're going to be doing, and now you buy the particular software program that you want to do, right? Then in the case of a physical part, though, I have to wait for it to arrive. And then I did a little bit more research while I was, waiting for the part. And then when the part arrived, I took action. And I took action by putting the part in, right? So I did have to pull up one of the YouTube videos again and follow the steps again because I'm like, I couldn't get it out. And I was like, wait, which way do I turn? And so I had to watch like 3 different videos to figure out which way to turn the part to get it out. And it was just stuck. So I finally figured it out, got it out, replaced it. So something that should have taken 5 minutes to replace took me about 20. And that's not bad considering I don't know anything about cars, right? And the fact that I happened to look up at the same time I was doing that and realized that I'm 2,000 miles over on oil change. I'm like, man, I got to get back into this whole like taking care of my own car thing. Because when I was married, my ex did it all. So I'm like, oh, I got to remember how to do all this stuff. And before I did this, the only thing I'd ever really done that was complicated was replace a light bulb in my old Land Rover, which was like 15 years ago. So I don't have a whole lot of experience with cars. That's what makes it scary, right? No, not a whole lot of experience. And I have changed a tire before. I've also caught a car on fire before. So there's that. Now, so I took action, I followed the steps, I got it replaced, right? I'm going to be honest. I don't know if it's fixed, right? I don't know if it's fixed. So far, it looks good. It drives. I can apply brakes. So it looks good so far. Oh, let's see if I can get this to progress. All right. So then let's talk lessons learned that still apply to software. Now, with the DIY method, so that's do-it-yourself method, I'm kind of hoping for the best, right? It's possible I did it wrong, but only time will tell. And this goes back to testing and giving it time. So a lot of times I see people, they'll buy a software program or they'll, have not even just software, it's just a program of some sort, and they'll go, it doesn't work. And I'm like, well, how long did you work on it? And how long did you wait until you came to that conclusion? And 90% of the time, they did nothing. And that's why they say it doesn't work. And then the ones that have done something haven't gotten to the point where it should work, right? And I do this a lot. So I do this where I'll say, okay, I bought the program. I've gone through the training. I started to work on something and then I'm like, oh yeah, it's not going to work. But I never finish it and get to the point where I'm marketing it. And so I frequently will move on to another project at that point. And it's just, sometimes I just get distracted and sometimes it's legit. This is just too difficult and I don't want to deal with it right now. Right. And so I'm like too time consuming usually. And I just set it aside. But if you don't give it the amount of time, you don't know if it works or not. Right. This goes for marketing. This goes for when you're building a business, e-commerce, everything. And same thing with my car in this case, because I don't have the proper tools to test. I'm going to either have to, I'll have to drive around for the next week and see if it does the error. If it does the error, then I didn't do it right. But I can tell you, I know I replaced the part correctly because I have brakes. So that's an easy one for me to figure out. I have brakes, so I replaced the part correctly. Is that the solution? I don't know, right? So that's where the DIY method, whether it's working on your car or software technology, tends to be a little bit more, you have to give it some time and test it. And so it takes more time than if you're paying somebody who knows what they're doing, right? So that's just the DIY method. Now, I bought a cheap part, okay? And the reviews, I bought the part and then I read the reviews. Probably not the best way to do it. So I bought the cheap, it's cheap, $13, right? And I said, oh, who cares? I'm just going to do it. And then I'm reading the reviews and a lot of reviews said it broke after 3 weeks. And I was like, oh, well, you know what? Who cares? If it breaks in 3 weeks, I know how to replace it now, right? So I'm like, I don't care. $13 tells me if I drive it for the next week and it doesn't do it, then I know that was the issue. And if it breaks again in a couple weeks, then I'll just buy a better part and replace that part. And then I'll know that I'll be fine. At least for a while. So I thought about it and I was like, I do this in software too. And I know other people do as well. And sometimes we buy the cheap software version and then we like get bummed out because we have to buy a different version later. Right. And I think about this all the time with, there's actually an app software that I love. I love both of them. And they're very similar, but they have different things that they can do. And so one is really cheap, but does have specific challenges. And I'm like, you can't do some things with it. And some stuff, in fact, they got a DDoS attack within like a couple months after they launched. And I mean, they got it fixed pretty quick and everything, but I mean, if you have it on there and it goes down, that kind of sucks. So that's one software. Then the other software is great. It has a lot of different functionality and everything, but it's harder to use and it costs more, a lot more. So I'm like, there's like pros and cons to it. So a lot of times people will go with this first one and go, well, but I want these features over here. Well, I understand that, but if you want this price point, you can only get those features in those price point. You have to move up to the next level. So sometimes we buy those cheaper versions to make sure that, we can learn and understand what we're doing, and then we have to upgrade later. And a lot of times this feels like you're doing double the work, and you are. But if that's part of the process, you need to go through the first steps and go through and make sure you know what you're doing, and then go through the second steps and say, okay, well, now that I fine-tuned it, I'm going to build my skills and move on to the next level, right? I mean, if you think about this, if you play video games at all, it's a similar concept. You've got levels that you go through, and there may be different challenges or whatever, but it's the same general concept. You're just adding more skills to it and adding more challenges to it. So it's the same type of thing. As you level up your skills, you're going to go into harder software, and it's going to become easier for you because you now understand the core skills before that. So there's nothing wrong with having to purchase one cheap when you get started and moving up later. Yes, there's going to be some work involved in it, but that's just kind of the way the world works, right? I mean, if you decide that you want to get Adobe, as an example, Adobe Photoshop, you learn everything, then they put an upgrade in there and you have to relearn stuff. That's just the way the world is now, right? So there's nothing wrong with getting the cheap version to start with and then upgrading later. And if you're like, hey, I don't want to do it twice, then get the more expensive one if you can afford it and learn that one, right? That's a decision you have to make. So that's another one I hear all the time. I just bought this program. Why should I buy this program? Don't. If the first one works for you, great. If you bought a cheap version, you need to upgrade, do the upgrade then, right? And that's just kind of just the way it is. Now, the third one I kind of talked about already is that it might not be the right solution. Okay, might not be the right solution. The error on my car that I mentioned, the transmission error, HTC fault, and parking brake fault, when those go off, there's a lot of different things that can go wrong. I already mentioned too, the battery and possibly the brake light switch. So replacing that brake light switch might not be the solution. And sometimes we do the same thing in business, whether it's marketing, it's with software, technology, whatever it is. We sometimes choose a path and then shift, right? We sometimes choose a path, then shift. I see this a lot with people who are like, they get started with a business model and then they're like, oh, the software is too hard for me. Oh, it's not working, whatever. And then they shift to something else. And a lot of people say it's like squirrel syndrome or shiny object syndrome or whatever, but I don't think that's necessarily the issue. I think it's that sometimes it's the wrong direction for us, right? I mean, I love e-commerce, but I gotta tell you, it's getting tough. It's getting harder to get in front of people. I can come up with new ways to do it. We're getting in front of new ways constantly. I've got 5 different methods to try out. But it's that constant competition that, there's just so many things that you have to do to stay relevant and be able to move ahead. And again, testing a bunch of stuff. We hope in January that we can release something that's amazing. Then, but it's got to work. If it doesn't work, then we're going to have to shift and go in a different direction. And sometimes that's what happens. Same thing with software. I'll give you a perfect example of this. So I actually have I used to have 2 recommendations for chatbots on Messenger. I only have 1 now. And the reason why is because there was a cheap version and then there was a rather expensive version when you compare the two. And then there's another version that I don't really talk about or discuss because too many people got shut down with it. So I had the two versions that I liked, and one of the versions, which is one-time payment, and it's okay, but all my stuff gets disconnected from it regularly. People, you can't log in regularly. Something happens and all of a sudden the chatbot's not working regularly. Why? Because it's cheap and they don't have the same resources that the one that it costs more has. So I only recommend one now, and that's because that's the one that I use and that's the one that I love and it works, right? But sometimes you go in one direction, you have to switch to the other. So that's just pricing points, but think about this as well. Let's say that you decide that you're going to go into messenger marketing. You learn that software, you go into it and you're like, hey, you know what? I'm just not getting to my audience. You're like, I need to shift to something else. I need to shift into building an app, right? I mean, it's a completely different direction. And sometimes we go in one direction and we need to shift to another direction. And sometimes it's just testing, and then we pivot when we learn more, right? So those are some lessons that I've learned. Now, something that bothered me was that I couldn't find any help, right? So if I wanted to pay somebody to do it, it was there. But I really wanted to be able to find somebody who could give me a tip, like just be like, oh, hey, yeah, check this. Or, oh, yeah, this happens to be, somebody that you can, a lot of times you can go in, like AutoZone and O'Reilly. These are ones that I tried both of them. So AutoZone, I went to two different AutoZones. One, completely useless. The people there don't know anything, and it's why. I don't understand it. And their parking lot sucks. So then the other one I went to, and the guy was really nice, and he helped me a lot more than the other one, but he couldn't give me any information because he didn't know anything about Land Rover. And nobody does because it's kind of niche, right? So it was useless. I couldn't get access to anybody that could help me. And it was really frustrating trying to do it on my own. And I'm really glad that there were YouTube videos and comments and everything else. But I'm like, man, it'd just be great if I could just ask somebody, hey, what do you think about this? And I actually did. I have, there's somebody, a friend of ours that worked on vehicles. He now does something else. And I asked him and ran through all the stuff. He even tried to look at the car and everything. And he doesn't do it anymore. So I didn't have tools or anything. So it was kind of like not great. But he didn't have any tips. He's like, well, maybe your alternator. And I'm like, well, that's going to be something I test down the line. But I'm like, there's no help, right? And it was really hard. You, on the other hand, are not alone. When it comes to technology or software, especially if it's something that I teach on the topic, or I teach the software, or I, promote the product, then I am happy to provide guidance. Now, sometimes it's going to be general. An example of this is my brother. He actually texted me first, and he's like, why is Pinterest so hard? And I'm like, what's the problem? He's like, Pinterest, LOL. And I'm like, great. Yeah, thanks for the LOL there. And I said, call me. And so he calls me, and we're talking about it. And the problem was that he was doing something different. He was trying to figure it out on his own. And he was using a software program I've never even heard of. And yes, it is possible that there are plenty of e-commerce platforms out there I haven't heard of, because there are tons of them. But he's using this e-commerce platform I've never heard of. There's no integration with Pinterest. And he's like, well, it's not, I can't do any of these steps. And I'm like, look, here's the general idea of it, right? And even though I couldn't see anything that he was doing, he's reading me stuff off the screen, getting upset about it. And I'm like, freaking take a picture and send it to me. But he didn't want to do that. He's just getting upset. And I'm like, look, here's the way it works, right? And so I said, you need to do step 1, you need to do step 2, you need to do step 3. And when you get to the step, you need to do this. And so he did. He's like, okay, fine. So reluctantly and loudly, he did step 1. And then he's like, oh, well, now I got to do step 2. And how do I do step 2? I'm like, I don't know. Try an RSS feed. And then blah, blah. Walk through it all. And I said, this is what it's trying to do. This is what it's trying to read. And so whatever he did, I provided him enough information. He was able to do step 2. So then he gets to step 3 and he goes, well, I read something about this earlier. And I'm like, okay, well, do it now. Right. And then I'm like, okay, this is the next step. And so it'll be 24 or 48 hours before we know if those steps worked. But that's, I couldn't see it. I'm doing it on the phone, and I'm still able to provide him enough information. He feels like he made it. He texted me later and said, I figured out how to add the last piece of code. And that's because I told him this is how it works, right? I'm like, okay, you got to put it in the header, you got to put it in the body, you got to put it whatever. He figured it out, right? Because he's using his own platform. If it's on WordPress or Shopify or even Wix, It's relatively easy to do, but if you're outside of that, it's a little bit of research. But because I know enough general information, you can hop in there and ask questions. If it's about something that's not, it can't be too specific. You can't be like, I use this specific program and I don't know how to do something unless I teach about that program, right? You can ask WordPress questions. You can ask Shopify questions. I don't use Wix. I think it's a joke. So I just don't see the value in it because it's going to hold your, in fact, I think Shopify, the same thing. This is why I like WooCommerce on WordPress, because they don't own your website then, right? You put it on your own hosting, you do all that kind of stuff. So I like that because it gives you options. But lots of people think that Shopify is easy, and so they like it. That's fine. Shopify is a good company. I still think that it's risky to put your site on something you don't control. But it's a good platform to get started, and you can always, move it over later if you need to. So anyway, so that's an example of something of being able to get help. Now, if you're at that point, then connect with me, connect with the group. You can do that through YouTube. Of course, I have this side note. I have this, when I go back and watch these, I always look like I'm frowning. So, and I do make a lot of faces. And so I'm always like, I'm trying in my mind, I'm going, hey, smile, Kim, smile. So you don't look like you're frowning all the time. I'll be like, oh, I'm going to have crazy eyes. Anyway, so we can connect through YouTube. There are comments. And now, yay, I have the community tab. I wasn't expecting it because it said it used to be at 500 subscribers. But it looks like they've changed that to be either 500 subscribers or if you have the advanced features. And I'm like, I didn't do anything and all of a sudden I have it. So I don't know. They must have changed something. Or they just finally approved me for something. Who knows? So I'm not really sure how to use the community tab yet. I put a couple things in there, but I'm like, I don't know how to use it. So that is a method that we can use. I just don't know how to do it quite yet. Then there's always the Facebook group. You can hop into the Facebook group. You can tag me in it. It's private and you can post anonymously if you prefer. Okay. So that is on Facebook. You can just go, search Little Biz Resources Facebook group and you'll find it. So go into groups, Little Biz Resources, and they'll be there. And there'll be a link in the description as well. Eventually, I hope to have an app. I'm going to be building an app and that's going to be the first one I do is my own. And it's going to have options and for connecting. And I don't know what yet. It might just end up going through Messenger. But now that Facebook's updated all the Messenger stuff, I actually can get notifications sometimes. So we might just do Messenger and funnel everybody through there. But there will be some automation with that. So so I just wanted to share that with you guys that I did go outside my comfort zone and I fixed my part in my car. Maybe. I didn't get oil all over myself, which is good since I was working under a brake, and there should be no oil whatsoever around there. Now, I guess technically brake fluid maybe could have come out from somewhere, but there was none. Yay, I got it out. I got it out, got it in, put everything back, and didn't break anything. So that was good, and it's better than some people I know. So anyway, I wanted to just share that with you guys. If you guys, please don't be scared of technology and software. It's an amazing tool. Not all of them, but there are so many amazing tools out there. If you're interested in learning about different kinds of services that you can do for yourself or as a service to sell, as an e-service, then we will be having tons of videos coming soon. But I wanted to get this one out because I keep doing videos and recording them and then they won't process. So I'm like, well, I'll just do another one, see if it works, get something out there and let you guys get to know me a little better, right? So if you have questions, pop them in. I would love to see you guys in the Facebook group. And eventually when I get the app going, I'd love to see you guys in the app. So anyway, for now, take care and I will see you next time.